Welcome everyone. My name is Rashad. I'm representing Terkko, and I'm very happy to see so many of you here already. 45 people, participants in the first 3 minutes, and more to come, I'm sure. So I welcome you all to our last health talks before the midsummer. And I personally am very delighted to have this event because it's something that I see very rarely in the ecosystem, where a corporate, hospital, and a startup get together to discuss innovation, collaboration, and specifically personalized healthcare, which is one of the very popular themes these days, and where the healthcare seems to be moving towards. So as you might have seen on the registration link, this is an hour and 15-minute event. We're going to have 3 speakers. We'll take a couple of questions after each presentation, but most of the Q&A session will be at the end. Feel free to post your questions in the chat while our speakers present, but in the breaks, Q&A sessions, you are more than welcome to turn on your mics and cameras and ask the questions personally. And our primary host for today will be Juha, and he will be taking your questions and moderating the session. So I'll give the floor to him. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. I will share my screen. So here we go. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Juha from ROS and also from the University of Turku, and I'll be your host in this session today. And also on behalf of ROS, I welcome you all to this very interesting Health Talks event. And we have, I think, that over 200 participants has registered to this session. So that's wonderful. Let's see how many of those can attend. So we have 3 interesting presentations today, representing 3 different real-life examples about how to utilize real-world data and how to get most out of it. And we make a small modification to agenda. We start with Mikko's presentation. Mikko is cardiologist who is very experienced physician and has worked with the new Apotti system at the Helsinki University Hospital. And Mikko will tell us about the functionality and benefits of the Apotti system. Then CEO Tuomo Pentikäinen from Whale AI will present us, I would say, a state-of-art approach to data anonymization, and he will describe what solutions anonymization provides. And finally, and then we take a presentation from Jessica. She's a senior principal data scientist from ROS, and she will tell us about Flatiron. Flatiron is a leading oncology electronic health record company and in US, and many companies have utilized Flatiron data, for instance, in regulatory processes. And if you have a question during the presentation, please use primary chat. And after each presentation, we have a time for 1 or 2 questions. And after all the 3 presentations, we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So then you can present questions to all speakers using chat or microphone. So let's start with Mikko's presentation. Mikko, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just switching on the screen share. If I can find the button again, it's down here. So my topic of today is the use of structured data in research and in clinic, with some focus on the EPIC system. Can you see the slides now? I think you can. I'll start with my affiliations and disclosures. I'm working as a cardiologist at the Helsinki University Hospital, that's my sort of primary job. I'm doing about 60% of clinical work at the moment. But the last 40% I'm working with Apotti, which is the company which is implementing the Epic healthcare system in Finland. We are called sort of Apotti associates or Apotti specialists, and every clinic has their own ones, and we are sort of coordinating the content of the healthcare system or the electronic health record system, and sort of getting it so that it's according to our specifications, and that we get the most out of it. Together with this, I've got a physician builder certification of Epic. Epic has a sort of a certification program for doctors where they let the doctors learn how to do some minor modifications into the system and let them sort of under the hood, because if for example structured data input is created by the users, by the end users themselves, the results are quite good, and the forms which we need to fill in meet the needs of the clinic, where we can do the modifications ourselves and sort of. Because the problem with structured data is often that there's a very thin line between usable and impossible to use, and communicating the need to the software developers is occasionally quite problematic, and that's why Epic has come up with this physician builder program, which lets the end users themselves do quite a lot of the specification work and quite a lot of programming actually into the system itself. So we're working in close association with the application controllers at Apotti and sort of getting the system to better meet our needs. I've got no competing conflicts of interest. Epic and Epic isn't paying me anything, but Hus is my employer, and that's basically it. I'll start with a short definition of what structured reporting is all about. And what we actually mean with structured reporting is that we store relevant data in a structured form. So we've got predefined categorical variables which meets some of the patient's conditions. Like for example, we can input, if we've got a heart failure patient, there's a New York Heart Association symptom classification from 1 to 4, for example, that can be structurally saved into the system, and then we can follow up how the patient's symptoms are improving over time, and if we make some changes in the medication or otherwise, then we can sort of track back to that what we can do. We can of course use sort of predefined values, predefined meters, which we take from the literature, for example, just like this one, or the symptom classification for chest pain in atherosclerosis. But then again, we can come up with our own structured data points. If we've got a registry, for example, of patients with a certain condition, we can come up with variables we need to record on, or we can have a national registry of cardiac patients, for example, and we can come up with some variables we would like to have in structured form. Epic is quite good in storing this sort of variables, and we can use even categorical variables to generate the note for the patient's visit, for example, that we just click a few options and then we get get a few sentences of text, which mostly makes a lot of sense. But just for text generation, it doesn't make any sense to do it structurally, because the text is usually better if you just type it in as text. But then again, you need to be able to report on the data elements in the future. Then we come to the source of the data. Where can we take structured data from? We can involve the patient. Epic has a system called MyChart, which is translated into Maisa in Finnish, where the patient has a portal which they log in either with a computer or with a mobile phone, and they can look at their own data, their lab results, their upcoming appointments. But also we can send them questionnaires in advance. For example, if the patient is coming in for a pacemaker implantation, we can send them a questionnaire about life quality or symptoms, for example, and we can repeat this maybe every 4 weeks. For example, that once the patient has got the pacemaker, we can just every 4 weeks for a couple of months, for example, repeat the questionnaire, so we can get a sort of repeated data series to see whether the patient has objectively improved in their well-being with the therapy they received. Then, of course, we can have the patient input also other values. We can follow the patient's weight. For example, in heart failure patients, it's very important to keep the weight constant, because the patients are very prone to get fluid accumulation and stuff like that. And we can have a follow-up where the patient every day or once a week inputs their weight and blood pressure and so on, and that can be used for following these patients. With patient-entered data, there's always the question of validity, as compared if we take a blood pressure measurement in clinic, for example, we can trust that it's probably done by a professional, that the manchette has been placed correctly, and that the blood pressure monitor has been calibrated sometime. And then there's always the question, if it's patient entered data, that where did the numbers come from? Does the patient actually take them from the machine, or does the patient just enter numbers which they feel would satisfy the healthcare professional at the other end of the line? Another source of structured data is a device. We've got some integrations with third-party programs. Like, for example, in cardiology, we use quite a lot of echocardiography, where we do some measurements on the patient's heart functions. We measure velocities of blood flow. We measure the systolic function of the heart. We are interested in how much the heart is pumping, what's the relative volume change during every heart cycle. It's called the ejection fraction, and that correlates with left ventricular function, and that can be structurally input, and it comes directly from the echo machine. So when we do some measurements on the ultrasound machine, we can import that data directly into the health record system, and then follow up with we can use this data in the follow up of the patient. Like, for example, patients with dilatation of the aortic root, which are very commonly followed up on a yearly basis, almost at the hospital. So we can have a nice figure plotting the dimensions of the blood vessel over time if we have these integrations. Laboratory results are stored in a structural form, in the sense that we can have a time series of creatinine values, for example, which we can then plot on a figure and come up with some time points. For example, if we started some new medication and see that there is jump in some lab value, we can correlate that with over time. Then we've got professionals, we've got nurses, doctors documenting on the patient when the patient comes to the clinic, has some procedure or whatever. We do make some notes. Part of them are very structural, and part of them are more like free text. We have been moving more and more towards structured reporting and structured ordering of stuff. If we start a new medication, there is a very strict sort of order which we place, and it can be tracked back over time, and we see quite in detail what the order was, whereas previously it might have been that there is just a row of free text which we have then which has then gone to a secretary, and then they make the future appointments, and that has become much more clearer now with the new system. The other side of the coin is, of course, that it's much more tedious to come up with very detailed structured orders. So many doctors are not very happy about structured reporting because it takes more time than what they are previously used to. But the end result is that we've got multiple data sources with different reliabilities, with different sort of data, which we can then combine and try to work as a whole. Where's the data going to? Well, we've input it into the computer. We've got a local database in Apotti, which is the Epic database, which is copied every night into a sort of a long-term storage. From that long-term storage, there's a mirroring system going into the host data lake service, which then also gets data from other sources. So not only from the Epic database, but there's all the data from the previous healthcare record system, and then some national registries are mirrored into the host data lake, so we can sort of combine data even from different sources at that level. Then we've got local sort of quality registries. Some of them have been existing already prior to the new system, and others have been migrated, that they've been on a different platform, and then they have been moved to Apotti. We've got national registries for the National Institute of Health and Welfare, for example. They are collecting certain data. And our aim is that we would only have to document it once into the electronic health record system, and then it would automatically integrate into the national registries. And so we would have comparative data with other university hospitals and so on. Then there's a question on which level we should build our reports on, and that, of course, depends quite a lot on the need. Epic itself has quite advanced reporting abilities, in the sense that we can build a dashboard, for example. I'll show you a couple of components which we can use, for example. And for sort of real-time reporting on data and parameters, it's quite good to have them on the Epic level. But then again, when we come to the situation that we've got different data sources, that we've got the electronic health record, but then we need to combine that with some national data from the THL, for example, then it's often better to go to the next level, to the data lake level, and take a sort of, for example, a Power BI based report, which then speaks to the Azure database, which this system has been built on. Then there's a question of how to motivate the end users to do this structured reporting. As I mentioned, it's a bit more tedious than what we are used to. I mean, it's much easier to just say to the secretary, well, this patient needs his follow-up, and next week can take the ordinary lab test, which we always do. But that has been made a bit more complicated with the new system, so that we have to fish out the individual orders for lab tests, for example, which we want, and then the follow-up visits and so on. And getting these in a state that the end users don't find it too difficult is quite tedious at the beginning, and that's what many end users are complaining about at the moment, that they are just clicking around and fishing each individual lab test and giving them a schedule and changing the dates and so on, and that's potentially very problematic, and that's why the workflows need to be optimized. That we need to have nice packages of lab tests. That we've got the ordinary labs which we usually take, they have been put into one package which has been given a date, for example, that this will happen in 1 year, for example, from now, and that you don't have to go separately to each lab test and tell, well, this one also in 1 year and so on. So that needs to be optimized. Again, with data import, it should be automated whenever possible. We've got examples that we print out data from another computer, then we take the paper to the other end of the room and type the same numbers into the other computer, and that doesn't really make any sense nowadays, because digital data is digital data, so that should travel without being analog in between. But well, we are not quite there yet, but that's what we are aiming for. We want to avoid the need for duplicate documentation. We're used to doing one report onto the electronic healthcare system. Sometimes these quality reports require inputting some of the data again. On the other hand, once we put something in structured form, it should also generate automatically the note, because that's very annoying that the people who just told the computer that the patient is not pregnant, and you come up with a X-ray referral, and the first question the computer is asking you whether the patient is pregnant. That's quite annoying. So it should be enough that you tell the computer once these facts. So that should be taken into consideration when these workflows are planned, and these data elements are planned where the data is stored in. And well, this sentence is sort of ending in the middle, but it's very important to present data from the structured reports to the end users, so that they get immediate feedback that, okay, I've filled in these forms for these 10 patients, and these patients are doing in average like this, and my colleague in the next room has also looked at 20 patients, and his patients' demographics look like this, and this sort of comparison is very motivating for the end users, and improves the quality of the registry data.
Mikko, five minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Right. Thanks. Here's a picture where we've got some of these dashboard components which we fished out of Epic. These numbers from how many coronavirus patients we had in HUS at a certain date, how many of them were in intensive care, and this is a sort of a throughput of the demographics of the intensive care treated patients. So once we have a diagnosis which has been put in a structured form, we can fish out these patients and see how they were doing. So these are sort of Epic inbuilt tools. There are some issues with registry data. There's always a registry owner, there's data security. Upload is nice in the sense that we are in the same registry with the whole of the Helsinki area. The problem is that we don't get direct access to the primary healthcare data because they are on a different registry. So we always need to ask the patient for a permission to go to the other registry. And on the other hand, the registry data is just as good as the data which has been input into the registry. there's a problem of the data for checking the validity of the data. If the numbers don't make any sense, if somebody says that this patient's weighing 1,000 kilos, it's obvious that there's 1 zero too much, but sort of illogical errors in structured data are sort of very problematic to track down. What are the pros and cons of structured data? We can show the data. We can have nice follow-up of patients when they're coming back to the clinic. We can show how they were doing last year, but also then have the detailed reports on sort of not just on a patient level, but on a population level. We can build best practice advisories based on structured data elements, so we can smell what the patient is, how the patient is doing, and if the patient is on a medication and their blood values, creatinine values, for example, are going up. The computer might suggest that we might want to have a look at this medication because the patient seems to not tolerate it very well based on the lab findings and so on. So we can improve the quality of the patient's care. The problem is that it's tedious and it hides what's written between the rows. So old-fashioned text is good because not only is there text on the rows, but there's also sometimes some message between the rows, which we are losing if we are just documenting in a structurized way. This I also already talked about, so I'll jump it's over. What we are doing in cardiology is that we've got structured reports for interventional cardiology. We have questions for the baseline characteristic and the standard procedure log for findings, interventions, medications, vital signs, how the patient was doing under the process. And one example which I might want to finish on is this pacemaker follow-ups, which we've been doing, where we have optimized the workflow in such that we have one screen where we can input the pacemaker measurement data, we can enter the patient data, how the patient is doing, order the follow-ups, and just press sign the visit, and that's then fine. What we want to do is we want to improve the reporting. We want to involve the patient more in entering the baseline characteristic and stuff like that, and we want to improve on comparing different healthcare providers with each other, and so that they get immediate feedback of how their patients are doing and how things are going on. So I thank you for your interest at this point, and open for a few questions.
Thank you, Mikko. We have one question. Let's take that. We have a question from Petri V. When the data goes to Apotti or from Apotti to HUS data lake, is it being processed or is it a storage as it is?
There's no change in the data at that level. It needs to be defined. Not all the data flies automatically into the data lake, but there's an extract flying into the data lake on a daily basis. But there's no processing at that level, in the sense that the data is sort of raw data which is flying over, and the processing is done then afterwards at the data lake level.
Thanks, Mikko. I think that we can take the next questions in Q&A, but we need to go forward. So Tuomo, let's continue with your presentation. Thank you, Mikko.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will take my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, if you can put full screen.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
It's partly hidden behind some of the controls of the Zoom, but I try to remember what I have there. So talking about real-world data, real-world evidence, and benefits of anonymization. First, I would like to take a few words that we are sharing the same understanding what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about the different risk levels of sensitive data. On the left-hand side, we have high-risk sensitive data, the raw data, and that is the original data, like in Apotti, for instance. And then most of the medical research, which many of you have been doing, has been done with pseudonymized data, meaning that the personal identifiers have been masked or removed from the data. And these both data types are still strictly under GDPR. Then when we go to the right-hand side, then we are coming to anonymized data, meaning that all the indirect identifiers which can be used to infer who actually are the people are also dealt with. And then when we go to the furthest right, then we come to synthetic data, meaning that we have cut off the link to the original data, and we are just dealing with the multivariate distributions of the variables and producing new synthetic data based on that. The driver for us is this, which Ernst & Young very nicely put in the recent report, that medicine is no longer just a clinical science which is supported by data, but we are in a very exciting moment where we are moving to a field where clinical science, medicine is a clinical science in very close collaboration with data science. And obviously, patient data is the most important driver of this change. However, there are problems that certainly many of us have seen. Data certainly is in silos and very often in many countries, and possibly even over the European Union border, which is making it even much more complicated. The data is sensitive, no question about that, and the legal burden is quite extensive. The AI solutions, they require a lot of data, and basically nobody, not even the biggest hospitals, have enough of that. Together, we might have enough of data, but in order to get there, we must find ways to share the data. Some of the data is behaving well. I was very happy to hear Mikko's speech about structured data, but actually much of the data is not behaving so well. Many of the data types of interest are of complicated nature, like, for instance, free text data, imaging data, genome data, and many other real-world data types. And then secondary use of data is a must. Healthcare data is the biggest investment Western societies have ever made in anything, and we just have to take that into reuse. It is well known that anonymization is a way of technology to solve the most complicated of these problems. Why? Because after anonymization, data is not anymore regulated by, for instance, GDPR. It can be accessed much faster, and it can be shared and combined much more easily than pseudonymized or raw data. However, anonymized data or anonymization hasn't been so much used, actually, as you certainly know. Why? Because the currently existing methods to anonymize data, they are substandard, suboptimal. They tend to lose information much more than what actually is necessary. They scale up pretty poorly. The anonymization process tends to require a lot of human work. Then when we are coming to the complex multimodal data types, imaging, genome, etc., these actually fit very, very badly to those complex data types. And those methods, they have been developed for relatively static or completely static data chunks. And if we are talking about rapidly accumulating or real-time data, these actually are scaling up very, very badly. What we have done, we have developed at FIM, Institute of Molecular Medicine Finland, a revolutionary model which is accelerated by neural networks, and it's solving some of the biggest obstacles in using sensitive data. First of all, you are never required anymore to share your sensitive data. Anonymization of the data is done within your organization firewalls, and also only anonymized data is shared. Then data quality has been an issue in all still this far existing anonymization techniques, and we have developed a way to minimize the information loss during the anonymization process. We have been working and found good ways to support those complicated or impossible data types, and this is massively faster and scaling up very well. This is say explosion picture of what happens within the machine. I'm not going into all deep details of that, but what I want to utilize here is that we are or the traditional anonymization techniques, they have been relatively straightforward. They are eating data in, they are doing the things, and then they are delivering anonymized data out. But what we wanted to add there was then user input to those phases where that is adding value. And most importantly, we are putting a lot of emphasis to the data utility so that the anonymization process is preserving those characteristics of the data that are of importance to the end user. And then also we are offering good possibilities or exceptional possibilities for setting or defining the parameters for privacy risk models. What the system is eating in is sensitive data. What it's delivering out is anonymized data, and then quality and risk reports. This is a bit busy picture. I'm not going to through all of the consent of it, but it was developed in collaboration with HiLIFE Lab and the University of Uppsala, KTH and Karolinska. And this is a relatively typical example. That was a coronary heart disease data coming from several hospitals, and they just happened to have a different distributions of the variables or covariates of interest in the different data sources. And if then we applied the traditionally existing anonymization techniques, actually the distributions are relatively different, and we were forced to cut off pretty much of the source data, so that this was the end result that when then combined after anonymization, the data from these 4 different hospitals. Then when we were applying our multi-party anonymization model, where we were training the neural network-based risk model and then applying that independently to each of the data sets, we were able to actually minimize the information loss quite substantially in this coronary heart use case. What we are offering and what are the products of our company? We have those in 4 baskets, 4 product categories. We are offering solutions for advanced anonymization, and that is the thing that we are offering especially for pharma companies, diagnostics companies, and also to hospitals or hospital districts. Then we offer services for pseudonymization and consent management, and for instance, several of Finnish biobanks are actually using our pseudonymization and consent management system when they are getting samples and dealing with the samples and data that they do have. Then what is very unique in our technology is that our anonymization pipeline and synthesization pipeline, they are actually very close to each other. And that is the third product category for us to support in the production of synthetic data. And then we offer services for consulting services for privacy-related risk assessment and risk mitigation, again, especially for pharma companies and for hospitals. Some of the benefits that our customers are looking for when they do collaborate with us or use the technologies that we are providing. Certainly real-world evidence production of that is a key there, and they need to have an access to wide and big data, and anonymization is a solution for that. Then clinical trials, reduction of lengths and reduction of costs is certainly a big issue there, and support, for instance, to decentralized clinical trial setups and all the issues related to the control arm especially are of big interest for pharma companies. Big issue, I already mentioned this legacy data, existing data, which has been collected for some other purposes, and the reuse of that old data is an issue which is pretty complicated, and anonymization or synthesization are exciting good possibilities for that in several use cases. Okay, this combining data from many sources, many sites, many countries, that is in the core of the benefits. Then, as I mentioned briefly, historically and this far, anonymization of streaming data or rapidly accumulating data is very, very complicated because anonymization techniques, they are computationally very heavy and they do not scale up well. When we are applying neural networks for the process, we actually can make it pretty hard to make the model, but when the model exists, then application of the model is very light. So we even support edge computing and IoT devices. Health economics, value-based healthcare, market access studies certainly are of interest. Now I'm not seeing what I'm talking because they are behind some Zoom controls. But our customers, they want to develop AI algorithms and they need data for that. And I think that was something about the data sharing, and then to help our customers to assessing and mitigating privacy-related risks. And this last point is actually very, very important because many of you, and I'm very sure that many of the audience actually have a big amount of data. You actually possibly would like to collaborate with that data, but you know that it is sensitive and nobody is willing to take privacy-related risks. And we have made that very transparent, and you can truly control where the risks are, and then we are supporting in the mitigation process of the privacy risks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tuomo. I think we have actually, you were so fast that we have few minutes for questions. There is let's take this one first. There is a question from Miranda. Is there any use case of whale AI in Asia?
Good question. We do have collaborators who are in Asia, and in that sense, yes. What we haven't done, we are not. We haven't been familiarizing with the privacy laws, for instance, in different Asian countries, and I don't see any problem for that. But we haven't been. Our collaborations have been in Europe and then in the US.
Okay, thank you.
But it's of interest, of course.
Yeah, I think that while Jess is preparing, we can take one quick question I think this is for Mikko. What are the biggest challenges when the patient reports in general after a procedure or the procedure condition or other issue post-event?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I think the biggest question is always how to get the patient to actually answer the question. That we get to the percentage of people reacting to be good enough to get any decent quality number of data. And we've got these pilots starting now that we are linking these questionnaires to the procedural logs, in the sense that the system knows that we automate the sending of the data. So we don't really know the full answer to this question yet, since we are just starting with this activity. But until now, the main concern has been that not all the patients answer these questionnaires once they get the questions. It's a bit the same thing when you bring your car to the service, and then you get a text message the next day asking, well, out of 1 to 10, how did we do this time? I don't think they get more than 30% of an answer rate there either. So I think that's the main issue.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mikko. So if you have more questions to Mikko, Tuomo, use the chat, or you can present the questions in Q&A. But now we move to Jess' presentation, and Jess, we have 20 minutes for your presentation, and let's then use about 10 minutes for Q&A. So Jess, welcome, and floor is yours.
Great. So thanks for having me, everyone. And can you see my screen okay? I'll just go into presentation mode. Okay, great. So really happy to be here with everyone. So I'm a senior principal data scientist focused on a variety of things with real world data at Roche, working for our global product development organization, and really wanted to share a relatively recent example of how we used electronic health record data for an evidence gap in one of our recent sort of reimbursement dossiers. But first, before I get into it, kind of the application is really focused on what we call an external control arm. And what really an external control arm is some type of control arm data generated outside the traditional clinical trial. So if you think about traditional drug development, it's been based on sort of large randomized trials, which basically have two arms. But of course, now a lot of times we see a lot of instances where we have single arm studies, which are really great at giving us efficacy data. But when we go for the discussions for reimbursement at the local level across different countries, the question is, how effective is our treatment, which we cannot derive just on single data alone. So this concept of external control arms is nothing new, but really it's a way how we bridge our evidence gap to trying to gain some estimate around effectiveness. So again, really focused on building a treatment arm from a different data source outside the trial, testing our experimental drug of interest. And this has been done for many years. What we have often done is looked at benchmarking based on literature, but of course, now with access to more and more data, maybe it is feasible for us to pull in and do some external control arm work. And as sort of, when we think about data can come from anywhere. It can come from clinical trial environment or also real world data. So data collected in routine clinical practice. And both of these could be great sources for external control arms. However, I do want to highlight there are some key differences. So with real world data, it is possible for us to actually be contemporaneous because we can generate data potentially or collect data retrospectively that happened in parallel time to our clinical trial, whereas previously with clinical trials, it was more this concept of historical controls. Also, real world data is more reflective of what's happening across in routine clinical practice. You have a broad access to therapy, where in clinical trials, we often only see sort of one single agent being used for that clinical trial. The major difficulty with using real world data is really around the data quality, and also our endpoints as well. So that's something I always like to highlight. Within our clinical trials, we usually have very high internal validity, whereas in real world data, the quality is a little bit more variable. And so what was our application using this concept of external control arms? And so really, kind of our situation was we had two single arm studies when we gained regulatory approval. There was an existing sort of randomized phase 3 study that was set up to compare our drug of interest to the current standard of care. However, this was not going to be enough evidence to gain reimbursement approval across multiple countries. And this is because we didn't have the true the true efficacy or effectiveness data that we needed to show our payers. And before I dive into the data bits, I just want to do a bit more of the context setting. of the indication. So this was a really small, rare indication. It was a biomarker specified indication of non-small cell lung cancer. And specifically, our sort of target patient population was really focused even on a smaller subset of those who progressed on a particular drug. So we're really looking at 5% of less patients, so very, very rare. And what's important is we had a good idea of what sort of the risk factors were and also prognostic factors were of these patients, because this is really important because it helped us dictate kind of what data we would need to enable this application. And so we were really kind of faced with this huge evidence gap. So what we kind of said to ourselves, okay, what could we do? How could we generate comparative evidence of what the current standard of care was, which our phase 3 that was sort of reading out in a few years' time wasn't even going to tell us. And so that's where we thought, why not try to build a contemporaneous external control arm using real world data? And how we felt we could do this was leveraging a US data source called Flatiron Health. And briefly, what Flatiron is a currently US-based oncology EMR system. So they are an actual EMR servicing oncology outpatient clinics. And what they do with that data that they collect on their EMR is build databases that can then be used for research. So all the databases are built at a disease level. And what's really unique is they focus not only on the structured data, so, you know, birth year, sex, but they also spend the copious amount of time to really pull out the unstructured data in the EMR for these databases, because all the key information that we need to do applications such as I'm talking about today, or even to do a treatment pattern study, is all unstructured data. And so they take the structured and unstructured data and harmonize it into a single database that we can then use for different research needs. And why we felt a US database was right for sort of ex-US setting was, one, patients were generalizable in terms of their profiles and outcomes between a US and European population, but also because of the recency of the approval of the control arm that we needed to generate, the US was the only option because they had the most follow-up time of the exposure of interest that we needed. So that's why we felt a US database would be suitable for this question, even though it was an ex-US setting. So how did we create our treatment arm? So we were able to find roughly around 311 patients with the biomarker of interest that had a confirmed advanced non-small cell lung cancer diagnosis. And the way we did this was, in Flatiron's network, we first searched with a structured data field for ICD code for lung cancer. And then we did some, quick further inclusion criteria to ensure that the patients we capture actually visited the Flatiron Center. And this is really where kind of the use of the structured data ends. And then the next sort of approach, we took a dual approach where we, in one sort of arm, we searched for medication orders for the drugs of interest. And then we also took an approach of searching at 82% of that sample, looking for patients with a confirmed diagnosis of advanced non-small cell lung cancer between a certain time frame. And this is really important because this all requires manual structure data review to confirm. So there are no structured data elements that actually have this information. And so by doing that, we were able to finally find 342 patients with our biomarker of interest, our stage of interest, and our diagnosis of interest. We further excluded patients that had enrolled in a clinical trial because, again, we had no idea of knowing what their exposure was because that's blinded to us. And so from that, we had 311 patients that had not been enrolled in a clinical trial with our biomarker of interest. And furthermore, 77 patients even had the exposure that we were particularly interested in. So with those 77 patients, that's when we started to think about how could we make a trial-like arm to further compare to our clinical trial. And where we started was we applied the same inclusion and exclusion criteria of the clinical trial. And if you've ever looked at a clinical trial protocol, you know there's an extensive amount of IE criteria. And so to actually apply this information, we had to leverage not only structured, but mainly unstructured data that Flatiron was able to provide us in our database. And once we were able to do that, we pulled the patient level data from our clinical trial in the Flatiron data set into one study cohort. And then from that, we were able to basically conduct a comparative effectiveness analysis. And so what we did was we applied different approaches. So we leveraged propensity score modeling to balance known confounders. And then from this subsample, we then estimated the overall survival from the initiation of treatment. And then finally calculated the adjusted hazard ratio, which would give us our effect estimate. And then sort of a sensitivity analysis, we were able to simulate clinical trial data from our control arm to really assess the plausibility of our control arm from the EHR. And so with our results, what that enabled us to do was to really have, add to the totality of evidence package in our reimbursement discussions. So we had the sort of effective evidence against what was now the current standard of care. Plus, we had data coming from a randomized phase 3 study that compared our drug to the old standard of care. And so both of these sort of combined pieces of evidence really help build a strong evidence package for this particular drug. And so this is really, the first time we had ever tried something like this, specifically using a brand new electronic health record data source. And so there's really a lot of learnings around how maybe this is a potential avenue where real world data could really supplement evidence gaps in payer submissions, because if we look at this particular application, there would never have been and there will never be a randomized RCT for the comparison that we made. Also, this was a really new application of methodology. And so across sort of the board, there's a lot of learnings about how do we integrate this methodology and what kind of additional verification or validation of this approach do we need to provide justification that what we've done is robust. Also, when we think about using US data outside the US, what additional evidence in terms of generalizability do we need? Because US data sharing laws do enable a lot better access to data than the EU. So it's often something that we have to think about. And so just thinking about the use of real world data, this meeting's about big data. I think this is kind of a nice example where we are often faced in drug development with minimal evidence packages. So how can we build our sort of evidence package that we have to hopefully lead to better decisions for patients, and potentially the use for external control arms with really rare indications where we know we have high data quality from real world data, could be a great avenue for evidence generation. What we've learned is that data quality is important, but also prospectively defining your approach, sharing your protocol through the right networks, a priori should be mandatory, but also validation work and guidance is still needed on how we best use real world data. One thing I will just call out that in terms of validation that has happened around this approach was a team internal to Roche took this overall approach of how you generate external control arms and used old Roche clinical trial data to say what would have happened if our clinical trials didn't have control arms, and supplemented in for a real world external control arm. Would our hazard ratio effect been the same? And you can see here from this figure, when they created a real world control arm and compared it to the true control arm, they were almost estimating always the same effect estimate. So I think this sort of piece of work further verifies this approach could be a potentially valid approach. So that's my presentation, sort of a very fast overview of how we can take big data and sort of find a subset of patients that might be important for adding to totality of evidence packages for reimbursement discussions. But I'll stop here. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Jess. The figure you showed was very, how would I say, interesting, or at least promising figure. So thank you for that. I think we have question from Suheng Shi, and I think that question I can present it first to Tuomo, and then Jess can also comment. So first Tuomo and then Jess. The question is that will de-identify or data anonymization process affect health data quality? What do you think, Tuomo? You're on mute. Can't hear.
Okay, now I suppose you can hear me.
Yes.
So love the question. This is the second best question in this kind of places. The other very good question is that how good is the privacy of anonymized data? And then the second is that is the quality good enough? So wonderful. I will show something relatively rapidly. So yes, it does. What we are doing, can you see what I'm sharing?
Yes.
So when we are doing anonymization of data, we are basically touching the data. We are doing transformations to the data, and certainly it is possible and even likely that while we are keeping the privacy at the very high level, it's likely that we need to sacrifice something in the data content. What in practice then the steps are? Suppression. We don't want to do that, but sometimes we need to do if they are very revealing. Generalization is the thing that we are most likely doing. We are diminishing granularity, for instance, by binning some continuous variables to categories, etc. Sometimes noise addition might be a very good possibility for that. Data swapping, possibly yes, but I think it's a bit geeky thing. And then pretty promising is then synthetic data in session, so that we are actually adding new trees to the forest, so to say. Then what actually then are the aspects of data quality? And I think that can be looked from pretty many points of view: accuracy, auditability, lineage, completeness, consistency, relevance, timeliness, uniqueness, validity, etc. I'm not going through those now in any detail, but our data science team would be very happy to have a deeper discussion of that. But I want to show something quite rapidly because I think the most important thing is that, first of all, you want to see that the privacy is preserved. And then after that, you want to see that can you repeat with anonymized data, that kind of things that you could repeat or would be able to repeat with raw data of pseudonymized data. And here we have been doing some testing, some normal modeling, logistic regression, etc. And we have done that for original raw data, where we of course had access in this case, and then with anonymized data. And the results are pretty good. And some other multivariate analysis also for original data and anonymized data. It is, by the way, funny that sometimes anonymized data is actually even doing better than original data, but that's a kind of artifact coming from regularization and that kind of things. But a short answer to the wonderful question: badly done, you destroy the utility or quality of the data. Well done, you are most likely to keep it at the high level.
Thanks, Tuomo. What do you think about this question?
Yeah, so I think what's really important in the anonymization process is that the use case is considered. There's not a one size fits all, and we need to be sure to be preserving the data that is essential to answer the question. So a lot of times transformations or even things like date shifting could mask important true trends in longitudinal analysis that we need to account for. So yeah, I think this is something that really has to be paid attention to, kind of the framework of anonymization, and that there is not a one size fits all, and you have to sort of do it per use case, basically.
Thank you.
Brief note, if possible. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Jess. And especially when we are talking about highly detailed longitudinal data sets, they are actually pretty hard to anonymize. And whenever we can, in those cases, go to some endpoint type of data engineering would be usually nice. But yes, it's not easy.
Actually, we got one more question from Petri B. What Jess was saying, I would like to send back to Tuomo. How Whale AI takes in consideration the uniqueness of the data, as not every dataset are the same. Thinking, for example, different hospitals, etc. Tough question.
Wow, yeah, that's a good question. Maybe first of all, I think again we need to think very carefully of the use case and the situation or context that we are talking about, and then one topic certainly which I would like to take here is then unique versus privacy-wise identifying and problematic, because they are, or it is questionable and can be discussed and should be discussed if unique is at the same time also identifying. But yes, when we are making a pooling of data from several sources, and where the say underlying distributions are or if the biological phenomena are such that they are relatively similar, then we are actually pretty easily can apply, and we have been testing using the anonymization models for several data sources. They seem to work pretty well. But then certainly, if the biological phenomena are such, or maybe the distributions are very, very different, then we need to control that in the building of the privacy risk model.
Thanks.
Thank you. Can I ask actually one question myself? I want to ask this from Mikko about the monitoring of the diseases or illnesses. I know Apote has something like this. I'm not sure if it is in Healthy Planet or the Dicer tool, but they have certain priority diseases, which has diabetes and mental disorders and others. And they have ongoing monitoring of the state of patients. Is it in the municipality or the city? Do you have something like this in whose do you monitor certain priority diseases and on yearly basis, and then you reach out to patients saying that you might have this disease and you're in the risk group?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is based on Healthy Planet and a sort of a registry in Healthy Planet, or population in Healthy Planet, which is you can predefine some inclusion criteria for patients with, if you enter a certain diagnosis or a certain risk factor pattern, then the patient gets automatically included into a group which generates a report every year. That's a bit problematic from the point of view of data security, in the sense that there is it's very strict in Finland who is allowed to see the patient data and who's allowed to contact the patient based on this sort of findings. And I think that's mostly limiting the use at the moment. Your example where you say that you've got a very high risk of getting diabetes, for example, have your blood sugar checked, please. Sending this message to the patient without the patient prior to taking contact with the healthcare center is very problematic from the data security point of view. So we are not using that at the moment, but we are planning to have a Healthy Planet data set of atrial fibrillation patients, for example, to better follow up their case. But that's something that hasn't been quite built to use at the moment. But that's something which is in the pipeline. Once we get Apotti in use in all the hospitals which are planning to use it in the near future, we can have more time in software development for this types of things. The slicer dicer tool is another thing which is more general, so it doesn't go into the patient level as such, but you can limit the population by diagnosis, for example. So I can put in that give me all the atrial fibrillation patients who have been registered into the system, and then slice them over by, for example, anticoagulants. How many percentage of these patients are on an anticoagulant, and how are these distributed, or what kind of hemoglobin values generally do these patients have, and what's the demographics in age and other comorbidities and stuff like that. So we can sort of ask simple research questions, or even a bit more complicated research questions, and get a sort of a wide answer to the question. So it looks like your population is looking like this, but you can't get to the level that you could validate the data that you could get on a patient level. But that's quite informative, and that's EPIC development which is ongoing quite quickly at the moment. So it's one of top priorities at EPIC to develop this tool even further. So we could benefit from this sort of data.
Mm-hmm. And I related to this also as well. I feel like currently most of the medicine or healthcare practice is a reactive practice, and I'm thinking that these tools could be used for prevention purposes, so that state or the healthcare providers or private healthcare providers monitor certain diseases and then kind of inform the potential patients about this. How long do you think it'll take for us to get to that stage?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It will probably take 5 to 10 more years at least before we are at this point, and there's this data laws which are sort of lagging a bit behind on what the programs are capable of, and how we should sort of focus this sort of. And then there's the question of cost and benefit. So you need to do the analysis of primary prevention. It's a bit problematic because it's very difficult to prove that it's very efficient, and it's always quite expensive to contact a lot of patients, because the end result is often that you should smoke less, eat less, lose some weight, and exercise more. So irrespective of what your lab values are showing.
Right. It's hard to come up with any constructive directive, I see.
Thank you, Mikko and Rosa. We got extremely long question from Lassi to chat, but fortunately also we got long answer from Jess. So please have a look at the chat. At the chat, there is a good question and good answer from Jess, but I think we don't have time to go through it. But have a look at it and take print screen if you want to read it later. But on my behalf, I think that we covered various interesting real-world aspects of real-world data, and thanks to all, and thanks to Rashid and Terkko Health Hub, and Russ had last words.
Yeah. Well, I also would like to thank everyone for joining, and for you guys, so Roche, and Vale, and specifically Jess, Juha, and Tomo, and Mikko. I think this was very productive, and we could probably repeat this sort of event in the future as well. But that is probably the last event before the midsummer. Yeah, that's all I had, and thank you very much. I was glad to have you here with the Health Talks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very much. Bye.